My name is Hillary Weaver. I'm 34 years old, and I keep newborn babies alive for a living. Last February, at my mother's dining table, my family announced my brother's fifth baby. And then they announced what they had decided to do with the rest of my life. Mom said I didn't have a real life anyway. She was smiling when she said it. Everyone kept eating, passing the rolls, like my future was a side dish somebody had already served. None of them knew about the folder sitting in my phone, 3 weeks away from changing everything. And what my mother did after I showed them. After the whole room went silent. That's the part I still hear at night. Because the phone wasn't the ending. It was only the match. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet women finally say the things families pretend not to hear. If you've ever been the one everybody leans on and nobody sees, this story is for you. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe, because the ending of this one is worth staying for. Now, let me take you back to a Sunday about 3 months before that dinner, so you can see exactly what my family thought I was for. A Sunday at my parents' house in the suburbs of Columbus went like this. I drove the 15 minutes from my apartment in Westerville with a casserole dish on the passenger seat, because Mom had called Thursday and said, "You'll bring the potatoes, you're so good at them." I peeled at the sink while my sister-in-law Kayla rested her eyes on the couch. I set the table. I changed the battery in the doorbell because Dad mentioned it twice without looking at me, which in Weaver language is a work order. I kept one eye on Sam, who was 4, and one eye on Nora, who was 2, while their parents scrolled their phones, and my mother gave Aunt Ruth the full tour of my brother Danny's promotion at the building supply warehouse. Danny got a toast. Kayla got sympathy for her exhaustion. I got asked whether I'd looked at the leaky faucet yet. I want to be clear, I wasn't sulking in a corner. I laughed at the jokes. I cut the pie. I love those kids so hard it embarrassed me. But somewhere between the dishes and the diaper I ended up changing, I understood my role the way you understand weather. I was the appliance of that house. Reliable. Plugged in. Not consulted. That particular Sunday we were clearing plates when Mom looked around and asked if anyone had seen the gravy boat lid, and 4 adults turned to me at the same time like I was the lost and found. It was almost funny. Then everyone got their coats, and my mother packed leftovers for Danny's family, for Ruth, for the neighbor. There was no plate for me. Nobody had noticed I never sat down to eat. I noticed that they didn't notice. I always noticed. If you want to know how I got that role, you have to meet my grandmother, June. When I was 27, her heart started failing, slow and mean, and the family held a meeting at my parents' kitchen table that lasted 11 minutes. Danny had 2 babies and a mortgage. Mom said her back was bad. Dad said whatever Mom said. And then every face turned to me with the same warm, terrible confidence, and my mother said the sentence that would run my life for the next 4 years. "You're the nurse." So I became the nurse. 4 years of evenings and weekends in Grandma June's little house on Maple Court. Pill organizers, sponge baths, 2 ambulance rides at 3 in the morning, 1 Christmas Eve spent in an ER hallway holding her hand while my family texted asking if I could still do the ham. I was working full shifts in the neonatal intensive care unit and then driving to Maple Court to do a second unpaid one. Mom handled what she called logistics, which meant phone calls, which meant instructions, which meant me. Grandma June died 3 years ago, at 89, with her hand in mine. At the funeral, the pastor stood up and praised my mother's devotion to family care, and my mother dabbed her eyes and accepted it. I stood in the second row, in the good shoes Grandma June had bought me, and I learned something about how credit travels in my family. It flows uphill. Here's what I'll say for now, because it matters later. Grandma June left me something. Not money. The little she had went into the house repairs years before. Something else. I'll get to it, I promise, because it's the reason there was a folder in my phone at all. After June died, the family found me a new job without posting it. Danny and Kayla lived 10 minutes from me, with 4 kids and a schedule held together by string. I became the string. Fever at midnight? Call Aunt Hilly, she's a nurse. Kayla stuck at the dentist? Aunt Hilly can get Mason from practice. Anniversary weekend? Aunt Hilly will take all four, she's so good with them. And here's the complicated part, the part that kept the whole machine running. I genuinely loved those children. Mason, 9, who narrated his own video games like a sportscaster. Sam, 4, who hugged with his whole running start. Nora, 2, a tiny blonde wrecking ball. And Ellie. Ellie was 7, and she was mine in some quiet way I can't defend biologically. She was the only person in that family who ever asked me questions about me. What do you like, Aunt Hilly? What's your favorite bird? Do nurses get scared? I would have walked into traffic for that kid. And everybody knew it. And that was exactly the problem. Love is a wonderful rope to tie someone with, because they'll hold the knot for you. I had tried boundaries, for the record. 2 years ago, I said no more overnight babysitting on weeknights because I was working 12-hour shifts. That lasted until the next stomach flu. When I held the line anyway, I didn't get an argument. I got a sigh and a look, and my mother on the phone saying I'd gotten difficult, and then 3 weeks of being lovingly punished with silence until I patched it by hosting Easter. I thought I understood the arithmetic of my family by then. I thought I knew every way they could spend me. I didn't. They were about to find a whole new currency. Let me show you the 2 halves of my life, back to back. One Tuesday in October. At 4 a.m. I was standing over an incubator with a baby girl born at 26 weeks, 1 pound 15 ounces, a human being smaller than a bag of flour. Her oxygen dipped, and the room got very quiet and very fast at the same time, and for about 90 seconds my hands and my training were the wall between that child and the dark. We got her back. Her father, a big man in a paper gown, cried into my shoulder like a boy. Her mother held my wrist and said, "You're an angel, do you know that? Does your family know what you do?" I smiled and said something modest. 12 hours later, I was at my parents' house, because Mom needed help moving the good china before the holidays. When I finished, I mentioned I was beat and wanted to head home, and my mother waved a dish towel at me, cheerful as a hymn, and said, "Oh, stay and do the pots, honey. It's not like you have anything to rush home to." I stood there with my hands in cooling gray water and did the math no one else in that kitchen ever did. Strangers in a hospital hallway thought I was a miracle. The woman who raised me thought I was a free hour with legs. That's the thing about being useful, and if you've lived it, you already know. Useful is invisible. A lamp is useful. Nobody asks the lamp about its day. I dried the pots, I drove home, and I sat in my car in the dark outside my building for a while. 3 weeks later, the group chat exploded, and everything I'm about to tell you began. It was a Tuesday in the middle of November when my phone lit up on the break room table like a slot machine. The Weaver family group chat, 31 messages in 4 minutes. At the top was an ultrasound photo, gray and grainy and unmistakable, and under it my brother Danny had typed, "Round 5, baby?" with about a dozen exclamation points. Kayla followed with a heart hands emoji and a post she'd copied from her page. God said one more. Aunt Ruth sent flowers and praying hands. My father sent a thumbs up, which for Roy Weaver is practically a sonnet. And I stood there in my scrubs, coffee going cold, and I felt the real, honest thing first, before anything else. Gladness. I love babies. I have spent 11 years learning how to keep the smallest ones breathing. A new niece or nephew is not a tragedy to me, and Danny sounded so happy, and I typed my congratulations with all my heart. I want that on the record. Whatever you think of me by the end of this story, know that I loved that baby before anyone had measured me for a cage. I had just slid the phone into my pocket when it buzzed again. Not the group chat this time. A private call. Mom. That alone was strange. My mother communicates by summons, usually routed through whoever she's standing next to. Her voice had a shine on it I hadn't heard in years, the sound she gets around weddings and funerals, occasions where she gets to direct. "Isn't it wonderful?" she said, and before I could answer, she lowered her voice like we were co-conspirators. "We need to talk about the plan, sweetheart." I remember looking at my own reflection in the break room window. Plan? Nobody had invited me to any meeting with a plan in it. I said, "What plan, Mom?" She laughed, light as frosting, and said we'd talk Sunday. Then she hung up, and I stood there with a feeling in my stomach I couldn't name yet. My body knew before I did. Sunday came, and I found out what the shine in her voice was made of. My mother laid it out at her kitchen counter while she frosted a sheet cake, casual as a weather report. Kayla would be down for the count by summer with a newborn and 4 kids. Daycare for that crowd cost more than Danny made in a month, she said. Which was true. And I agreed, which was my first mistake, because agreement in my family is a signature. Then she got to the heart of it. So we've been thinking, you could go part-time at the hospital, or step away for a while. Honestly, that's cleaner. Kids need consistency. She smoothed the frosting flat. Family takes care of family. I set down my coffee and I said it plainly, calmly, the way you'd state your name in court. No, Mom. I have a job. I love my job. I'm not quitting to be a nanny. And here is the part I need you to understand, because everything that follows grows out of this moment. My mother did not argue with me. Arguing would have meant she'd heard me. She just smiled at the cake, tapped the spatula twice on the bowl and said, "Well, we'll figure out the details later." Like I'd raised a small concern about parking. My father wandered in, took a swipe of frosting and said, "Your mother's got it all worked out." With real admiration, the way other men say my wife restores furniture. I drove home with my hands tight on the wheel, replaying it. I had said no, clearly, in English, and it had passed through her like wind through a screen door. What scared me wasn't that she'd ignored it, it was how relaxed she'd been. My mother is never relaxed unless she's already certain she's won. I couldn't figure out where the certainty was coming from. I found out soon enough. That night, back in my apartment, I did what I had done almost every night for months. I opened my laptop, went to my email, and refreshed the inbox the way some people say, grace, quietly, every night. Here's what nobody in my family knew. 10 months earlier, in January, I'd worked the worst shift of my career. We lost a 24-weeker at 5 a.m., and I cried in the supply closet. And then I came home to find my mother had left me a voicemail asking me to make 3 dozen deviled eggs for a church thing. Since you're off Thursday. Something in me went very still that night. Not broken. Focused. I sat down, still in my coat, and I filled out an application I'd had bookmarked for a year and never let myself finish. A neonatal resuscitation training program attached to a hospital in Galway, Ireland. A 2-year contract, teaching nurses and midwives the thing I do best in the world, keeping impossibly small people alive. I'd learned about it at a conference in Cincinnati, from a silver-haired Irish doctor named Dr. Whelan, who watched me run a simulation and said, "You teach with your hands. Have you thought about doing this on purpose?" I did 2 video interviews in the fall, on my days off, in a blazer on top and pajama pants below. By November, I was one of the finalists. Final decisions were promised by December. The only living soul who knew was Jen, our charge nurse, my best friend of 9 years, who kept my secret like a vault and asked about it in code at work. Any weather from the coast? So while my mother frosted her certainty onto a sheet cake, I had a maybe growing across an ocean. A maybe, that's all. But some nights, a maybe is the only thing between a woman and a basement. I refreshed the inbox one more time and went to bed. The first proof came 10 days later in the middle of a shift. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't know, and when I stepped into the hallway to answer, a pleasant voice said, "Ms. Weaver, this is the front office at Beechwood Elementary. Mason's running a fever, and we couldn't reach his mom or dad. You're listed as his emergency contact." I said, "His what?" The woman repeated it. "Patient as you please. Second emergency contact, right after the parents." Kayla Weaver had listed me that fall. Nobody had asked me. Nobody had even told me. You should know it takes nothing to do that. A parent just writes a name and a phone number on a form. No signature from the person being volunteered. No permission slip for the aunt. I traded my lunch break, drove to the school, and collected a pink-cheeked Mason, who felt terrible and looked worse, and I got him settled at his house with medicine and cartoons, because none of this was his fault. And while I was hanging his backpack on the hook, a folded sheet of paper fell out of the front pocket. It was a printed schedule, made on a computer, with clip art suns in the corners. Across the top, in cheerful purple letters, it said, Aunt Hilly Days, Tuesdays, Thursdays, alternating weekends. My name, blocked out in a calendar grid like a shift worker's, weeks and weeks of me, printed and laminated with a magnet on the back. I stood in my brother's hallway holding it, and I felt the floor of something give way. Then I checked the date printed small in the corner, the day the file was made. October. October. My mother hadn't called me about the plan until the 3rd week of November. They had printed my life a month before they mentioned it to me. The second proof found me in the cereal aisle. It was early December by then, and I was pushing a cart through the grocery store after a shift when Aunt Ruth came around the end cap and lit up like a porch light. She hugged me hard, rocked me side to side, and said, right into my ear, "We are all just so proud of you." I asked what for, which was honest. Ruth pulled back and beamed. "Carol told everyone at church, you're taking the year off for the new baby, a full year, for family." Her eyes went shiny. "You're a saint, honey. Pastor Mike said your name from the pulpit." From the pulpit. I stood there between the oatmeal and the granola bars while my aunt squeezed my hands, and I did not correct her. And I want to be honest with you about why. Because standing in that aisle, I could already hear exactly how the correction would travel. Not as Carol was mistaken. No, it would travel as Hillary backed out. That week, 2 more people stopped me. A woman from the church flower committee at the gas station, and our old neighbor at the pharmacy. Both glowing, both blessing me, both congratulating me on a decision I had never made. My mother had gone out ahead of me, into every room I might ever stand in, and she had told my story first. So I called her. I kept my voice level and I said, "Mom, you can't tell people I'm quitting. I told you no." And my mother said, warm as a heating pad, "Oh, honey, I was just proud of you." Then, softer, with a little laugh that had no joke in it, "You'll see. It'll all feel natural once the baby comes." I hung up and sat very still. My mother had built me a cage out of compliments, and she wasn't done building. I decided to tell them about Ireland, not the offer, which didn't exist yet, but the truth, the shape of my actual life. I rehearsed it for 3 days, in the shower, in the car, at red lights. Just a simple paragraph. I've applied for something overseas. I'm a finalist. My answer about the nanny plan is no, and it will still be no, even if Ireland says no. Friday dinner at my parents'. I got there early. I helped with nothing. On purpose, which took effort. And the moment came. Plates cleared, Dad reaching for the news, Mom pouring decaf. And I actually got the first sentence out. "Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something about next year." My mother set down the pot and looked at me, and I swear some animal part of her already smelled it. And right then, Kayla called the house phone, shrieking. Sam had spiked a fever and had a seizure, a short one, on the kitchen floor. Everything after that was coats and headlights. I was at their place in 10 minutes, because febrile seizures are terrifying and almost always harmless, and somebody in that hallway needed to be the person who knew that. I checked him over, talked Kayla down off the ceiling, rode along to urgent care just in case. It was midnight when we got back, Sam asleep on my shoulder, heavy as a sandbag. And in Danny's kitchen, my mother, who had driven over to manage things, looked around at the wreckage and said, to the room, in the voice of a closing argument, "You see? This is exactly why the plan makes sense. Some of us have families, Hillary." "Family takes care of family," she said, for the second time that month. I drove home at 1 a.m. with my speech still folded up inside me, unsaid. Tell me something, honestly, in the comments. Have you ever rehearsed a sentence for days and life just kept snatching the microphone out of your hand? Type the plan, if you know that feeling. And stay with me, because what my father did next hurt worse than anything my mother had said out loud. The following Wednesday, my landlord called me. Walt owns my building and about half the bowling trophies in Westerville, and he bowls Tuesdays with a league that includes, among other retired gentlemen, my father. Walt's voice was all sunshine. "Hillary, your dad mentioned you'd be moving home in the spring, helping with the new grandbaby. Wanted to talk timing on the lease, whether you'd want out early. Awful sweet of you, hun. They don't make daughters like that anymore." I stood in my kitchen and looked at my own reflection in the dark window, and I heard myself say, calmly, that nothing was decided and I'd call him back. Then I drove to my parents' house. 15 minutes, most of it spent breathing on purpose. And I found my father in the garage with the radio on, oiling something that didn't need oil. I asked him quietly if he'd really discussed ending my lease with my landlord before anyone had asked me a single question. And my dad, my sweet, conflict-proof father, rubbed the back of his neck and looked at the workbench and said, "Well, your mother said it was decided." That sentence sat between us like a dropped wrench. Not, "we decided." Not even, "she decided." It was decided. Weather, gravity, an act of God. I looked at this man who taught me to drive, who I have watched stand up out of his chair maybe twice in my life, and I understood that he was never going to be the one to hand me my own future back. He was just the man who painted whatever room my mother pointed at. "Dad," I said, "I'm not moving into the basement." He nodded slowly, the way you nod at a child who says she'll be president someday. That nod did more damage than a fist could have. Meanwhile, the bill for all those rescues was landing on my actual life. Between the school pickup from Mason and the night of Sam's seizure, I'd swapped 2 shifts in 3 weeks. And December in a NICU is not a month with slack in it. Jen caught me by the med room, arms crossed, and being caught by Jen is like being caught by good weather. You don't feel it until she's serious. "Hill, you know I love you." Nursing office flagged the swaps. She lowered her voice. "The education track spot posts in the spring. You're the obvious pick. But if you keep bleeding shifts every time your family stubs a toe, somebody with worse hands and better attendance gets it." I started to explain, and she held up one hand, not unkind. "I know it's not your fault. It's never your fault. And it's always you." Then she said the sentence I've thought about 100 times since. "They're spending your career like it's their gift card." I went back to my pod and stood over an incubator and watched a 2-pound boy breathe, up and down, machine steady, and I thought about gift cards, about how there's a number on them, and everyone swipes like there isn't, and one day, the card just declines, and everyone acts shocked. 11 years I'd built this. Charge nurses requested me. Terrified parents asked for me by name. And my family was carving it up into Tuesdays and Thursdays with clip art suns in the corners. I finished my shift, sat in my car in the parking garage, and let my forehead rest on the wheel for 1 minute exactly. Then my phone buzzed against the cup holder. Not the group chat. Not my mother. The subject line started with the exact phrase I'd been praying toward for 10 months. Offer of appointment. I didn't open it in the car. I know how that sounds, but I'd waited 10 months, and some things you don't unwrap under a parking garage light. I walked back into the hospital, badged into the NICU supply room, and stood between the shelves of preemie diapers and saline flushes, in the one place on earth where I have always known exactly who I am. Then I opened the email from Dr. Whelan. "Dear Ms. Weaver, on behalf of the program, I am delighted to offer you appointment as neonatal resuscitation training specialist, Galway. A 2-year contract, a real salary, listed in euros, with a relocation allowance and a settling-in stipend for the first month. The hospital would sponsor my work permit. Nurses like me are on Ireland's critical skills list, which is a fancy way of saying they need us faster than they can grow them. My registration paperwork, filed back in autumn, already in process. Start date, March 9th, which meant flying by March 1st, which meant 12 weeks to dismantle a life and build a new one. I read it 3 times. My hands were shaking so hard the shelf of diapers blurred, and I laughed at that. 11 years of steady hands in codes, trembling now like a first-year student's. I did not sign it that night. Instead, I did something I hadn't planned. I made a folder on my phone, just for this. The offer letter, the contract to be signed, the airline page with the one-way flight to Shannon already in the cart. And when my thumb hovered over the box asking me to name the folder, I didn't type Ireland or Galway or New Life. I typed 4 capital letters, June. Then I stood in the supply room a while longer, listening to the vents hum. All I had to do was sign. So why were my hands still shaking? I think you already know why. It had her name on it, and I still hadn't told you what she gave me. Here's what June left me. The last truly clear night she had about a month before the end, she sent me to her dresser for the tin where she kept buttons and dead batteries, and she made me dig out a wristwatch. Small face, leather band gone soft as a dollar bill, and it ran 4 minutes slow. Always had. She pressed it into my palm and folded my fingers over it with both her hands, which took her some doing by then. And she told me a story I'd never heard in 31 years. That once, long before any of us, she'd been accepted to an art program in Chicago. 19 years old, portfolio full of birds she'd drawn from the kitchen window. She never went. Her mother needed her, then her brothers needed her, then a husband, then babies, then the babies' babies. I kept waiting for somebody to tell me it was my turn, she said. Her voice wasn't bitter. That was the worst part. It was just tired and certain, like a road sign. Nobody ever did, Hilly. Nobody hands a woman her turn. You take it. Then she tapped the watch with one knuckle and said she kept it slow on purpose, so every time she checked it, she'd remember time doesn't wait politely. I wore that watch to her funeral, 4 minutes slow while the pastor praised my mother. I was wearing it in the supply room 3 years later, the night the offer came. So that's what I did, standing between the diapers and the saline. I looked at her watch. Then I opened the folder called June, and I signed the contract with my thumb, and I bought the one-way ticket, and I put the phone in my pocket and went back to work. My hands were still shaking. I signed anyway. That's the whole secret if you want it. You don't wait for steady. You sign shaking. I meant to tell them that week. I had the offer letter printed in my purse, folded like a passport. My plan was simple. Sit my parents down. Alone, calm, adult to adults. I drove over on a Saturday in January, rehearsed and ready, and my mother met me at the door with her eyes absolutely blazing with joy, grabbed my sleeve and said, "Perfect timing, come see what your father did." And she led me down the basement stairs. They had cleared it out. The treadmill that held coats, gone. Dad's fishing tubs, stacked in the garage. The paneling wore a coat of fresh paint, pale yellow, and against the far wall, made up with a quilt I recognized from my childhood bedroom, stood my old twin bed. My dresser from high school. A little lamp. New curtains with flowers on them, hung over the window wells. My mother stood in the middle of it with her arms out like a game show model. "It'll be like having our little girl home," she said. And her voice wobbled with real feeling. And that's the detail I need you to sit with. It was real. She wasn't performing. My father stood on the stairs behind us holding a paintbrush he hadn't needed for days, smiling, hopeful, proud of the yellow. They had built the cage lovingly. That's what I keep trying to explain to people. It was a loving cage, with my own bed in it. I stood there with the offer letter burning a hole in my purse, and I understood, cold and clear as tap water, what would happen if I announced Ireland right here, alone, with 3 weeks' worth of phone calls and pastors and tears available to be deployed against me before I ever reached an airport. My mother wanted an audience for my future. Fine, she'd get one. Before we get to the dinner, I owe you my brother, fair and square. Late January, Danny showed up at my apartment to return a stock pot, which was an excuse, because Danny returns nothing. He stood in my doorway turning his cap around in his hands and he said, "You don't have to do this, you know. The nanny thing." And for one full second, the hallway lit up. One ally. One human being inside the fence who saw me. I opened my mouth to tell him everything. Galway, the contract, all of it. He beat me by half a breath. "But Hill, it would really save us. I mean it. Kayla's drowning. Daycare for the little ones is more than my paycheck. And you're—" He shrugged, gesturing at my quiet apartment, my single coffee cup drying by the sink, my whole compact life. "You know, you're free. Free. Sit with that word a minute, the way I have." He meant available. He also meant costless. In my family, those had always been the same word, and he didn't even hear himself say it, which is exactly how you know a belief has finished becoming furniture. My brother is not a villain. I want that understood. He's a tired man with 4 kids and a 5th coming, doing arithmetic in the dark. And long ago somebody taught him that his sister was a number he could always carry the remainder to. I didn't tell him about Ireland. I just said, "I'm not free, Danny. I've never once been free. You've just never seen the bill." He blinked at me like I'd spoken Portuguese, thanked me for the stockpot he'd brought me, and left. I closed the door and stood with my back against it. My last maybe ally, and he'd folded before he ever unfolded. The summons went out the last week of January, delivered through the group chat with tulip emojis. Sunday, February 8th, a family dinner, to celebrate our newest blessing and settle the arrangements. My mother writes double exclamation points like other people load shotguns. Everyone was commanded to appear. Danny, Kayla, all 4 kids, Aunt Ruth, Uncle Gary. Mom asked me to come at 3 to do the chicken. "Since yours is the one everybody likes." Of course she did. I sat on my couch that night with 2 futures in front of me, and I looked at them honestly, one last time. In one, a pale yellow basement, and a laminated calendar of me, and everyone at church calling me a saint until the day they buried me 4 minutes slow. In the other, a folder in my phone named June, a signed contract, a one-way ticket for March 1st, 3 weeks out. 12 years of keeping other people's babies alive, traded up into teaching a whole country's nurses to do the same. I checked the watch. I checked the folder. Both still ticking. Before we walk into that dining room together, you and me, I want to ask you one thing, and I'm asking seriously. If you have ever been the one your family calls the free one, the sister with nothing going on, the daughter who doesn't really have anything to rush home to, the aunt whose whole life fit inside other people's emergencies, type the word free in the comments. I want my mother's algorithm to see how many of us there are. All right. Sunday. 14 plates on the table, 2 announcements coming, the one they had planned for me, and the one riding in my coat pocket. Deep breath. Let's go to dinner. But first, the week before the dinner, I burned my boats. Quietly, thoroughly, and in person. Monday, I called Walt myself, before my father could do any more helping, and gave notice on my apartment for the end of February. He was gracious and a little confused, since the story he'd been sold had me moving to a basement, not across the Atlantic, and I let the confusion stand. Tuesday, a man with a clipboard from an international moving company walked my rooms, taped little stickers on the 4 pieces of furniture worth shipping, and quoted me a date. Wednesday, I sat in the HR office at the hospital and slid my resignation across the desk. 30 days notice, by the book. Last shift, February 27th. Every box checked, because I was not going to let anyone say I left my babies short-staffed on a whim. And Thursday, Jen took her break at the same time as mine, read the confirmation email over my shoulder in the stairwell, and burst into tears, and then laughed at herself for crying, and then hugged me hard enough to leave a bruise and said, "Galway has no idea what's landing on them." I want you to notice what all this means, because it's the hinge of everything. By that Sunday, there was no version of the future where I stayed. The lease was ended. The movers were booked. The notice was in. Grandma June's watch ticked 4 minutes slow on my wrist and in my head. All week, Her voice kept time with it. Nobody hands a woman her turn. You take it. So when I walked into my mother's dining room, I was not coming to ask permission. I was coming to deliver news. By Sunday, the only thing my family could still take from me was the goodbye. One more thing happened that week, and I've gone back and forth about telling it, because it's the only time in this whole story I nearly lost my nerve. Thursday evening, I swung by my parents to return a roasting pan. Armor on, in and out, 90 seconds. But the kitchen was empty, and I found my mother at the dining table alone, with a photo album open, and she didn't hear me come in. She was looking at a picture of a young woman in an old-style nursing student's uniform, white cap and all. It took me a second to understand the young woman was her. "You never saw these?" she said, not startled, not looking up. And my mother told me, in about 4 minutes, flat as a recipe, the story I'd never once heard. She'd been in nursing school. She left at 24, when Danny was on the way, because that's what you did. Then her mother-in-law, June's opposite, a hard, cold woman, had the first stroke, and for 6 years my mother washed her, fed her, turned her in bed, in this very house, while raising 2 kids. 6 years, she said. And the day of that woman's funeral, your father's family lined up to thank the pastor for his kindness. She smoothed the plastic page with one thumb. I used to cry in the pantry so nobody had to see it. I stood there in my coat, holding a roasting pan, looking at my mother maybe truly for the first time, a woman the machine had eaten first, decades before she ever fed it her daughter. I almost said something. I almost put my arms around her. Then she closed the album, patted it twice, and looked up at me with perfect, sincere serenity. "That's what the women in this family do," she said. "You'll understand when it's your turn." And there it was. The wound hadn't taught her mercy. It had taught her the wound was a uniform and she was the one who did the fittings. My last shift that Friday was the kind of day that makes the whole job make sense. Baby girl G, the 26-weeker from October, 1 pound 15 ounces the night I met her, went home. 4 months of machines and setbacks and 2 steps forward, and she left the building in a car seat that swallowed her, wearing a hat with a pom-pom bigger than her fist. Her mother stood in front of me in the hallway and tried to make a speech and couldn't, and finally just gripped my hand on the car seat handle and said, "You're the reason I have a daughter." I keep a small collection of sentences people have said to me, the way other women keep jewelry. That one's the diamond. The unit threw me a cake in the break room. Someone had printed a banner that said Galway's gain, and under it, in marker, Jen had written, "Ohio's loss, don't you forget it." I cleaned out my locker. 11 years fit in one paper bag, 2 mugs, a stethoscope, a drawing Ellie made me of a bird in a nurse's cap. Driving home, I took the long way, which I never do. And the long way happens to pass my parents' street, which I'll admit was not an accident. The house sat there in the winter dark, porch light on, and low along the foundation. Through the window wells glowed the light of the basement, pale yellow even from the road. 2 definitions of a real life, 1 block apart. In one window, a banner made by people who'd watched me work. In the other, a twin bed made by people who'd watched me my whole life and never once seen me. Sunday was 2 days out, and I still didn't know exactly what I'd say at that table. As it turned out, I didn't need a speech. My mother had written one for me. Saturday I took Ellie to the library, just the 2 of us, a standing date we'd kept since she was 5. Except this time, we did something new. We got her a library card of her own. She signed her name on the little line with her tongue between her teeth, pressing so hard she tore the paper a little, and the librarian laminated it while she watched, like it was a moon landing. Afterward, we sat at the big table by the atlas stand, and Ellie, who is 7 and sees everything, spun the globe and said, "Show me your favorite place." I put her finger on Ohio. Then I walked it across the Atlantic, slow, and set it down on the west coast of Ireland. "That's far," she said. "It is," I said. She looked at the globe for a while, keeping her finger on Galway like she was holding it down for me, saving my seat. Then she looked up with those X-ray eyes and asked, "Will you still know me?" I had to look at the atlas stand for a second. Then I told her the truth, which is the only thing I've ever been able to give that kid. "Everywhere I go," I said, "I will know you. That's a nurse promise. We're not allowed to break those." She nodded, very businesslike, and stamped my hand with the date stamper when the librarian wasn't looking, so I'd have proof. I still have the smudge in a photo. Here's why I'm telling you this. Whatever happened at that table on Sunday, I knew 4 small people were going to hear a version of me afterward that I didn't write. I had one afternoon to leave a truer version behind, sealed and laminated in the one heart most likely to keep it. Sunday, February 8th. I got to my parents at 3, as instructed, and I made the chicken, as instructed. And I want to be honest about why. Not obedience, ceremony. I stood in the kitchen where I'd been useful my whole life, and I brined and buttered and roasted that bird for 14 people, and I did it the way you lay flowers somewhere, on purpose, for the last time, as a free gift instead of a bill paid. The house filled up behind me. Uncle Gary arrived first, as always, and posted up by the football game. Aunt Ruth brought her ambrosia salad that nobody eats and everybody praises. Danny's crew blew in at 5 like a small weather system. Backpacks, sippy cups, Mason narrating, Sam sprinting, Nora on Kayla's hip, Ellie peeling off to find me in the kitchen and show me the library card in its own zip pocket. My mother orchestrated everything from the head of the table, radiant, wearing her good earrings, the ones that mean an occasion. My father carried in extra chairs, then opened the sparkling cider. Danny's crowd doesn't drink, and lined up glasses like little soldiers. 14 plates, counting mine. The good china I'd helped move in October. Cloth napkins, and then I saw it. At my place, leaned neatly against my water glass the way a menu waits at a restaurant, sat a bound packet, maybe 20 pages, spiral spine, clear plastic cover. Kayla's font, Clip Art Sons. The cover read, in cheerful purple capitals, Weaver Family Childcare Plan. There was a tab inside with my name on it. I looked at it the way you'd look at your own obituary, printed early, and set beside your fork. I did not touch it. I sat down, smiled at Ellie across the table, and felt the phone in my pocket against my hip, patient as a stone. Glasses started filling. Here we go. Dinner rolled along on its rails, chicken praised, kids fed, Gary telling his one story about the raccoon. And then, at dessert, my mother stood and dinged her glass with a spoon, and the table went quiet the way it always does for her. She'd prepared remarks. God gives every family exactly what it needs, she began, hand on her heart, and she toasted Danny and Kayla and the little blessing due in June, and everyone raised sparkling cider, and it was lovely, truly. I raised my glass too. But she didn't sit down. And, she said, gleaming, unfolding it like a homily, God also provides the help. Which brings us to the second announcement. She turned to me with her arm out, presenting me to my own family like a prize behind a curtain. From June, our Hillary will be stepping away from the hospital and moving home. Your father did the basement, wait till you see it, to be this family's full-time nanny. All 5 babies, one loving aunt. She actually got applause. Ruth clapped. Kayla, glowing, reached over and slid the spiral packet closer to my plate and whispered that page 4 had the weekly grid. My father raised his glass at me, proud, hopeful, already toasting. I set mine down. Mom, I said, and I kept it level and pleasant. We've talked about this. I have a career. I have a life. The clapping trailed off, and my mother, still standing, still smiling, still warm as August, tilted her head at me with genuine, bottomless fondness, and said it. Oh, sweetheart, you don't have a real life anyway. Beat. No husband, no babies, that little apartment. This is us giving you one. Around that table, listen to me. Nobody flinched. Ruth studied her ambrosia. Gary watched the muted football. My father topped off the nearest glass of cider like a man bailing a boat 1 teaspoon at a time. My whole family sat in perfect, comfortable agreement that my life was a vacant lot they'd finally found a use for. I smiled. I actually smiled. Because 3 weeks? That's why. And I reached into my pocket for my phone. I unlocked it under the table. One tap. The folder named June. I stood up, the way my mother had stood, and I turned the screen outward. And I set the phone down in the middle of that table, face up between the ambrosia and the chicken carcass. Slow and gentle, like laying down a winning hand you're not even proud of. Before you laminate anything else, I said, you should see this. My contract filled the screen. The header with the hospital crest, Galway, the words, Neonatal Resuscitation Training Specialist, and my signature, already on it, dated 3 weeks back. I swiped once. The boarding confirmation. One way. Columbus to Shannon. March 1st, 21 days from that dinner. Nobody moved. I mean that almost clinically. 14 place settings and not one sound except little Nora, 2 years old, drumming her spoon on the tray, the only honest percussion in the house. Ruth's fork stopped in the ambrosia. Kayla's hand lay flat on the spiral packet like she was taking its pulse. Danny leaned in, read the screen, and went gray. My father looked at my mother, which is what my father does instead of having reactions. So I said the rest, and I kept my voice the way I keep it in a code. Low, slow, procedural. I've taken a 2-year post in Ireland, training nurses to save babies like ours. I've signed. I've given up my apartment. Friday was my last shift. I fly in 3 weeks. I looked around the whole frozen table and then at the packet by my plate. The plan you printed has one problem. I was never yours to schedule. The room stayed frozen for 1 more second. Maybe 2. And then I watched my mother's face do something I had never seen it do in 34 years. It went from marble to water. Her chin shook. Her eyes filled. Right there over the good china, in front of her sister and her grandchildren. And my mother said the one thing in this world I had no armor against. Not a scream. Worse. She said it soft. You would leave this family, she said, barely above the sound of the furnace, over a job. That was the soft thing, and it landed like soft things do, deep, under the ribs. Then the room thawed all at once, and everything happened on top of everything. Kayla burst into tears. Real ones, I should say. Exhaustion has a sound, and I know it. And cried, "How could you do this to the baby?" A baby, I'd like the record to show, who did not exist yet, and already outranked me. Danny said nothing. He sat there working the edge of the tablecloth between 2 fingers, staring at my signature like it was a car crash. My father took off his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt, and said, to no one, "Ireland. That's an ocean away?" As if the problem were nautical. And my mother cycled through her arsenal in front of me, weapon to weapon, while I stood there and watched it happen almost in slow motion. First, the little laugh. "This is a phase. You'll come home by summer." Then the prosecutor. "Who applies overseas behind her family's back? Who does that? Sneaking around for a year like we're strangers." Then the pulpit, hand flat on the table. "Charity begins at home, Hillary Ann. It begins at home." And me? I gave her the only thing I had left, which was brevity. "It's signed," I said. "It's paid," I said. "It's done." 3 little flat stones, one at a time, into all that churning water. That's when Uncle Gary, who had not said a full sentence since the raccoon story, muted the football, turned around in his chair, and said, "Carol, let the girl talk." God bless Gary. Because the next thing my mother tried wasn't louder. It was smarter. And it nearly worked. But first, since Gary had bought me the floor, I used it, one time, for 15 years' worth. I didn't shout, and I didn't cry, and I did not perform. I just said it plain, like a discharge summary. Since you think I don't have a real life, let me tell you where it went. 4 years of it went to Grandma June. Every evening, every weekend, every ambulance, while this family called me once a week to check her progress like a package. Ruth flinched at that one, she knew. The last 3 went to Danny's kids, the midnight fevers, the pickups, the seizure. The 5 weekends a year I took all 4 so you two could remember each other's faces. I did it out of love, and I'd do most of it again. But every one of you sitting at this table filed it under free. I picked up the spiral packet with my name on the tab and set it back down in front of Kayla, gently, like returning something borrowed. You listed me at Mason's school without asking. You printed me a schedule in October, before a single one of you said the word please. Dad talked to my landlord. Mom told the church. My whole future got planned in this house, at this table, and now here's my one question, and I'd like a real answer. I looked around at all of them, and I let it be quiet, and then I asked it. In 15 years, did even one of you, one time, ask me what I wanted? Nothing. The furnace hummed. Nora's spoon had stopped. Ellie was looking from face to adult face, doing math no 7-year-old should do. That's what I thought, I said, and it came out gentler than I expected, because the silence was sadder than I expected. Family takes care of family. I agree with you, Mom. I've been doing it for 15 years. I just was never included in the family being taken care of. My mother folded her napkin, very slowly, pressing each crease. When she looked up, her eyes had changed. The storm was gone. Something patient had replaced it, and it scared me more than the shouting. Hilly, my mother said. Not Hillary. Hilly, the little girl name, the one from before everything, and her voice went soft as bathwater. Sit down, baby. Please. I stayed standing, but something in me leaned toward that voice, which is the honest truth, because I'd been waiting my whole life for it. You're right, she said, and the table gasped in its own quiet way, chairs shifting, Ruth's hand at her throat. We should have asked. We got ahead of ourselves. That's my fault, and I'm saying it in front of everyone. She spread her hands, humble, reasonable, her eyes still shining from before. So let's fix it the right way. 1 year. That's all. Stay 1 year, till the baby's steady on her feet and Kayla's back on hers. Then you go to your Ireland. And you go right. Her voice cracked on purpose or not, I still don't know. You go with our blessing. We'll throw you a proper send-off at the church. Your father will drive you to the airport himself. The whole family, waving you off, proud of you. Just don't leave us like this, in anger, with everything broken. Don't you want to leave the right way? And my father, who had not asked me a question since I was a teenager, said quietly, into the middle of it, We'll finally do it right, kiddo. Ruth exhaled like a jury delivered. I want to be dead honest with you about that moment because this is the whole story. Right here, not the phone. Everything I had ever wanted from these people was on that table, wrapped and ribboned. To be asked, to be thanked, to be blessed on my way out the door, waved at, missed. All I had to do was hand them 1 more year of my life, and I could buy the exact love I'd been working 15 years on credit. Every eye on me. Ellie's eyes on me. June's watch ticking on my wrist. 4 minutes behind. The way a whole life gets 4 minutes behind, then a year, then 40. And I stood there and actually felt myself begin to nod. Then I caught it. The flaw in the diamond. The thing my whole body already knew. A blessing you have to buy is not a blessing. It's an invoice with a bow on it. And there would always, always be 1 more year. The baby would need to be steady. And then Nora would need kindergarten. And then Mom's knees would go. And the machine would keep finding reasons. Because that is what the machine is for. And I knew it. Because a woman in a photo album once waited 6 years in somebody's pantry for a thank you that never came, and then called the waiting holy and passed it down to me like china. Nobody hands a woman her turn. You take it. No, I said. The word came out quiet and complete. My mother blinked. No, not in June. Not in a year. Not the right way, because, Mom, there was never going to be a right way for me to leave, only a paid way. I picked up my phone off the table and June's watch caught the light, and I heard my own voice come out steadier than it had any right to be. And you were wrong about one thing tonight. I do have a real life. You've just never once asked to see it. Then I went around the table, because the clock on the rest of it had run out. I kissed Mason's hair, mid-protest. I hugged Sam, who hugs with his whole body even when he doesn't know why. I kissed Nora's fat little hand, and I crouched down at Ellie's chair and told her, level with her eyes, a letter, every month. Nurse, promise. She nodded, businesslike, chin trembling, and stamped my hand with her thumb because the real stamper was at the library. I got my coat. And behind me, my mother stood up so fast her chair barked on the floor, and her voice finally broke open, and what poured out was the last card in the deck, the oldest one there is. If you get on that plane, she said, shaking, don't you call this house your home anymore. The room made a sound, all of it at once like a breath going in. I stopped at the doorway. 1 second. I turned around. And I looked at my mother, furious, terrified, wet-eyed, dressed in her occasion earrings, the machine's best worker and its oldest casualty. And I said the truest thing I've ever said in that house. Then I'll write to the people in it who still call me family. And I walked out my parents' front door into the February cold and nobody followed me. And that, right there, that was the price. And I paid it in full, and it was still the best trade I ever made. I sat in my car at the curb for a while before I could drive. The dining room window glowed gold behind the curtains, and I could see shapes moving in it. My whole family. Still in there. Still around the chicken I'd made them. The world's warmest closed door. Here's the part I won't dress up. I cried. Once. Hard, about 90 seconds. Hands at 10 and 2 like I was steering through it. Grief, not regret. And yes, there is a difference. And that night I finally learned it in my own body. You can be certain and heartbroken at the same time. Both, all the way. Then I wiped my face with my coat sleeve, and I looked down at Grandma June's watch. And I did something I'd been meaning to do for 3 years. Nothing. I left it 4 minutes slow, exactly as she kept it. Because I finally understood the setting. It was never measuring time. It was measuring the cost of waiting for permission. I pulled away from the curb with the porch light shrinking in my mirror, and the road ahead ran straight to March 1st. On March 1st, I flew. Nobody from the house came, and I'd made peace with that at the curb 3 weeks earlier. Jen drove me, cried at security, threatened the TSA agent with affection, and texted me a photo of my own plane taking off. Galway, I'll be honest, tested me first. It rained sideways for 11 days. I knew nobody. My flat came with a kettle and a silence I had to learn like a language. Turns out when you've been needed every hour for 15 years, quiet feels like falling at first. Then my first training day came, and a room of nurses and midwives stood up when I walked in, and there was my name on the schedule board. Miss Weaver, lead specialist. Paid, printed, asked for. I teach hands now, dozens of pairs of hands that will hold thousands of small lives, which is arithmetic I can live inside. News from Ohio arrived in pieces, all of it through Danny, who started texting me maybe 2 weeks in, short and sheepish, photos mostly. The baby came in the middle of June, a girl, healthy, loud, mother and daughter doing fine. Kayla hired part-time help 3 days a week and, wonder of wonders, the sky held. It turned out, we have no other option, had only ever meant no other free option. My mother did not call. She told the church I'd abandoned the family in their hour of need, and some of them believed her. And Aunt Ruth, I'm told, has gone noticeably quiet whenever the subject comes up, which for Ruth is practically a protest march. And every month, like clockwork, a letter arrives from Ellie, printed careful and hard, the letters getting smaller and straighter as the year goes on. Then, one evening in June, Danny sent a photo that sat me straight down on my kitchen floor. the new baby, red-faced and furious and beautiful. Under it he'd typed, "Her middle name is June." It's been a year now since that dinner. Saturday mornings, after my early shift, I walk home along the bay with coffee, and at noon, my phone rings for the standing video call. Ellie reads to me, library books, her own card, her own stack, and Mason narrates whatever game he's conquering, and Sam presses his eye against the camera because he thinks that's how you hug through a phone. Danny leans into the frame now, most weeks, and says embarrassing brotherly things about my accent. And once, from somewhere off camera, I heard Kayla's voice, awkward and real, say thank you to your aunt. And I had to look out the window at the water for a second. My father sends postcards, of all things. The last one had a lighthouse on it and a message in his careful mechanic's print. Proud of you. Don't tell your mother. I laughed until I wasn't laughing. Because no, my mother hasn't called. Maybe she won't. Ever. And here's the change I can actually report from the far side of the ocean. I can live with that. Not happily. Honestly. There's a difference there too. The machine still runs in that house, and it still tells its story at church. But it runs without me now, and the youngest woman in that family is named after the one who told me to take my turn. June's watch is on my wrist right now, 4 minutes slow, in the middle of a life that finally runs on time. If you take one thing from my story, take this. A family that only loves you for what you carry.